I am Tracey Shearer, and I'm so happy that you're back with me for another storytelling episode. We've talked about a lot so far, haven't we? We've talked about how storytelling has been around for forever. We've talked about the power of storytelling to heal, not only yourself, but others. How storytelling can change minds and lives, the difference between telling a story and storytelling, and so much more. What are we going to talk about today? Okay, we're going to talk about tips and tricks for storytelling. And we're going to go over the various areas. So books, social media, the business side. And we're going to talk about those different types of aspects. We're going to talk about some storytelling tips in general. And then we're also going to end up talking about our story toolkit. And the story toolkit is really fun because it's a place where you can collect potential stories. So I can't wait to talk about all that. So let's go into just some general things about storytelling. And some of these I know you're going to say, sure, Trace. I already know that. Why are you telling me that? But it is really important because I find people miss this, or they don't think it's that important, so they don't spend the time on it. So the first thing I'm going to go over, because it's the longest concept, is your story has to have a beginning and an end. I know, sounds common sense, right? But so many people don't think about how they're beginning their story to match up with how they're ending their story, making sure that there's that full circle of completion for the reader, and that things are promised in the beginning that are delivered in the end. There's a lot of different nuances when it comes to beginnings and ends. Now, I'm not talking about the books where people do cliffhangers and they don't wrap anything up because they want somebody to read their next book. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in general, when you really want that full experience. So think about when you eat like a beautiful meal that's just fully satisfying. And when you're done with it, you're like, wow, that's what I'm talking about. Not where you're left wanting. And what I mean by the beginning and end pieces are however you begin your book is going to tell your reader, because talk about books first, it's going to tell your reader what they can expect. And the end should wrap up what you had in that book. For social media, the beginning of your post is going to tell people what to expect and where you're going with it. And then the end wraps it up. You want to make sure that you have a good beginning and end. I'm not talking about the verbiage to use or the hooks or anything else like that. I'm just talking about taking people on that full circle journey. Now, what's great is with anything written, you can edit it. So with a book or social media post, you can go back through and go, okay, now I know how I ended it. Now I'm going to go back and fix the beginning so that it all matches up. That's what's so beautiful about editing. However, I'm going to mention one of the things that I see happen verbally many times in business. So you're telling a story because you're taking the client on this journey. You're telling them all of the different things that are basically going to have them go, yes, please, I will buy whatever you're selling, whatever you're recommending. I understand how important it is and everything else. And I see people start out and then they don't know how to wrap it up. So they're so excited, they think they know what's going on. And then they get to the end and they're like, there's not that nice little wrap up. This is why role playing in business is really important, especially for the verbal stuff. You can run it by somebody. However, I suggest don't overdo it, because then it starts sounding rehearsed. And you don't want to sit there and have your client feel like this is a canned thing that you tell all clients. So don't overdo it, but it's totally fine to run it by somebody. Editing is great for figuring out, like I said, the beginning and the end, but make sure you have a beginning and an end that wraps things up, because those are so important for giving that full experience to the reader to go, okay. And you also then are not going off on tangents that are going to detract your reader from whatever you're trying to get them to do, to feel, to understand, whatever your message is, by knowing how you're beginning and knowing how you're going to end it really helps you out. And I'm going to go into, for writers of books, the two different types of writing styles, but I want to continue on some of the main things that you can run into with storytelling that can derail you. So we talked about having a beginning and end. The other thing I'm going to say is check your spelling. No, another common sense thing, isn't it? It is. However, I see so many, especially social media posts and even emails, with misspellings. Spell check is not going to catch everything. It's not going to always catch a word that you use that is absolutely correctly spelled, but the wrong word. So like there versus there. Or a lot of times I find I end up transposing through and though, just because it's one little letter off. So really take a look at your spelling. I will say that if I start seeing things that are constantly misspelled, it derails me from the message and from the story, because it's jarring. I'm not talking about people that maybe a particular language they're writing in isn't their first language. I would definitely be misspelling constantly there, but it just means you have to be extra careful when you're going through and doing it. For books, yes, you can have an editor and a proofreader that are looking at things like your spelling, but it's important. So maybe somebody else is going to catch it, and it's not on you, but somebody needs to catch it. Because I've had a lot of people that have said, oh my gosh, I picked up this self-published book off Amazon, and I could tell nobody ever edited it because there's misspellings all over the place. Nobody ever looked at it. You don't want to have that, because your incredible story is then not going to really have the impact because of all the spelling errors. The other thing is grammar. So whether or not you're writing a post on social media, or you're writing a book, or you're writing an email, correct grammar is important. So spend some time looking at that. Look at some of the grammar guides. Some people use Grammarly. I'm going to say that I've heard good and bad things about it. Do whatever you think helps you the most. But definitely take a look at grammar. Same thing with the punctuation piece as well. I'm either use too many commas or not enough. Thank heavens my editor is on me about that stuff. So she fixes it, and then the proofreader catches the rest. But I'm terrible about comma usage. I just am. I've given up now. I just write it, and I know I'm going to fix it later. But I will mention specifically here about exclamation points. And the reason why I want to talk about these is that I don't see them quite as often in books, because I think editors go, hold on, what are you doing? But I see them often on social media. And I'm not talking about the comments that you might make on somebody's social media post where you're like, oh my gosh, I love this, or you're a queen, or whatever, and you're putting exclamation points. That's fine. It's your comments. Go wild. Do whatever you want there. But in your actual post, really take a look at how many exclamation points you're putting in there. Because remember, with an exclamation point, you're essentially exclaiming and shouting and yelling. Get out of the road, that type of thing. You put an exclamation point there. So I've had clients before where they've had overuse issues, and I've had them read their posts exclaiming where there's exclamation points. And I tell you, when we got done with it, they were like, oh my God, I sound like I'm crazy. I know. And we've all done this. We get excited and we just put them in there. Really take a look at that on social media, because there's a short attention span and your posts are shorter. So you don't want somebody to be turned off and be like, oh my God, everything is just exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. Is this gal, what's going on with her? Why is she so excited? Is this kind of like, is this the way she is all the time? Would I see her on lives and she'd be screaming? Maybe she would, who knows? But you know what I'm saying? So really take a look at the exclamation point usage. The last thing I'm going to mention about just overall for storytelling and looking at tips and tricks is read your stuff out loud. You fill in things When you read it yourself, like you're reading it, your mind is filling in anything that's missing because you know that's what you meant to say. And a lot of times you gloss over stuff where there's a word missing or a connector missing or the wrong word. Like you're thinking of a different word, but there's a different word down on the page. You're thinking a lot of that stuff and you fill it in because you're so close to it. You've written it, you know it. But when you read something out loud, it forces you to actually process what you're reading and speak it. And many times you can find your own errors that way. You can also find where you put emphasis on something that maybe you didn't in the written word, but when you're saying it, you're putting emphasis on it. So you want to make sure that you emphasize it when you're writing it, when you're editing. You also can find those tricky, bumpy sentences that as you read them, you're going, oh my gosh, this is a mouthful, or oh my gosh, this doesn't make sense. There could be things that you just don't know because you're so close to it and you're reading it through and you're like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. But when you read it out loud, that's when you realize that there's a little bit of that bumpiness or run on or something that you're going, it's really important. Now, some of you I know might want to have an electronic voice read it, like through your computer or whatnot. If that's what works for you, fine. The thing I don't like about that is the electronic voice doesn't really know what you were thinking. So I think it's important when you're reading it because then you can feel the authenticity of what you're putting down and what you intended and how it's coming across. But either way, read it out loud. Have somebody else read it out loud if you want, but listen to it. Listen to it as they're reading it. It's really helpful. And my writers group, we started reading our scenes out loud when we were in there because it came from our first ever writing class. And it was so beneficial because I tell you, hearing somebody read their stuff was very helpful when I was looking at the written word and going, she actually said this word instead of this word, or she emphasized this instead, or she realized that was bumpy too. You can glean so much. So read it out loud. Okay. So let's go into some of the tips and tricks with books. So the first thing I wanted to mention with books is figuring out what type of writer you are, because this is one of the great tips that will help you get yourself motivated, inspired, and going and knowing how you want to write in order to keep all of that energy going. I'm not talking about your unique voice. I'm talking about the actual process of writing. So I'm going to go over the two extremes. So on one hand, you can have people that plot, and they're called plotters. They will plot out all the different aspects of the book from the beginning to the end. They can sometimes plot out by character. They can plot out by chapter. They can plot out by acts, act 1, act 2, act 3, and what happens. They can list out all the different things that they're going to have happen and what's going to go and how the transformation is going to happen for the characters and their arcs and everything else. They can go through the whole thing and they've got it all laid out. So they've got a framework and they know where they're going and they know what's going to happen in their book. There are some people that absolutely love to do that, and it's beautiful for them. It helps them write. It keeps them inspired. It keeps them focused. It makes them feel calmer because they know where they're going. There's not going to be a point where they sit there and go, I don't know what comes next. They know what comes next. They plotted it out. They've thought about it. They've processed the different things that they can make their characters go through. Plotting can also help for memoir. You can sit there and plot out what memories you want to include in order to get your message across. If you're going to jump back and forth through time, where do you want to do that? Where would that be helpful? Are there things that you're going to organize it in such a way as maybe by challenges? So during a particular challenge that you went through, there was something when you were 6 that influenced how you handled it now and how you maybe handled it badly. And then you had to realize you did this or that. You can map out and lay out the things that you want to hit in your memoir in order to take the reader on that journey so that at the end, they've got whatever your message is. And they're feeling whatever you're hoping they're going to feel. And you can set that up. So you've got to list it out. Also for personal development books, right? You've got 20 steps to do this particular course of whatever it is. So let's say it's how to flip a house. Just put that because I was watching a house flipping show just recently. So maybe there's 20 steps on how to flip a house. What are those 20 steps? Plot it out. What types of things are you going to include in there that's information? What are the stories that illustrate each of those points that helped you get to where you are now? Because now you've flipped 500 houses successfully. You can plot that stuff out. For nonfiction, you can also plot it out too, depending on what your nonfiction topic is. What's your take on it? What's your angle? What are things you're going to include? Plotting can be extremely, extremely helpful. Now, the other end of the spectrum is pantsers. So those are people that write by the seat of their pants. This means they don't have a plot laid out. They might have some ideas in their head, but they're just writing whatever comes out. I'm just going to see what happens, and I'm just going to go with it. Now, the benefit of that for a lot of people is the freedom. They're not hampered by something that's laid out. They also didn't have to spend all the time laying out and plotting because that takes a lot of time. And sometimes people can get so caught up in the plotting that they don't actually write the books because they're doing all the research and the plotting and putting it together and da, 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 da. So for pantsers, it can be very freeing. And then they can see what comes out of their imagination. And a lot of people like that method. And then there's all the spectrum in between. So for me, I consider myself a plantser. So I'm part plotter, part pantser. So what I do with that is I have the basic story idea. I know the beginning, I know the end. I don't know exactly how I'm going to get to the end, but I know what I want to happen in the end. I have different spots in the story that I want to hit. And then I write the first third and I pants it and I see what comes out. And every single time something has come out I didn't expect that actually enriches the story. And then after that first third, I look at it again and I set new little spots to hit. And I go from there. And then I write some more for the next third. So for me, I love it because it gives me the freedom to explore, but yet I know the direction I'm going. Because I've known some pantser buddies that spend so much time and they write a whole bunch of stuff they can never use because it really didn't fit what they were trying to say or where they were going or it didn't work. And so I would say that the majority of writers I know are somewhere in between. There are some that are heavy duty plotters, but there's a lot of them that are in between. So the reason why I mention this as a tip is that a lot of times people don't talk about finding the writing method that really works for you. And if you can figure that out and play with that up front, it'll really help you down the road. Try different things. See what feels good. That's what I did. See if fully pantsing feels good, fully plotting feels good, something in between. Just experiment and practice with it. See what gets you energized. See what gets you excited to sit down and write, because you don't want to choose a method that is going to hamper your storytelling because you're so worried about whatever the thing is you're worried about. You want it to just be something where you're like, oh, I can't wait to write, because that's going to keep you going, keep the storytelling flowing. So it's an important tip I wanted to give you because a lot of people don't talk about really spending some time to figure that out. They either go, you're either this or this. Like, no, figure out really what works for you and your method of writing. Because when you connect that, like I have with mine, it's amazing. I just feel so much better when I write now. So I wanted to pass that on to you. So, okay. The other thing I was going to mention for books is the importance of having a writer's group, which is another tip I can give you. This is what I talked about with my writer's group. So the best thing about it is it's free. It's free critique. It's free feedback. It's free support. Writers groups can be incredibly helpful to your knowledge base, to your growth. Having a safe place where you can really explore things and bring like messy, rough drafts of stuff. If you can, I highly suggest getting together a writer's group. There's lots of writing organizations throughout the country, and through them, a lot of times they'll have critique groups or postings and stuff. So check it out. There's lots of stuff online too. The other piece are beta readers. So another tip I'll give you too is for your storytelling to really have somebody look at your entire book and give you feedback before it's polished and ready to publish or ready to send to an agent. So beta readers take a look at your full manuscript. Writer's group is great. You might be bringing scenes as you go along, and you might give your writer's group your full manuscript as your beta reader. But usually writer's groups are not reading your entire book in a setting. They're reading a scene, or they're going over and helping you brainstorm or whatnot. They can help you out on that little slice. But what's very helpful for book writers is for somebody to look at the entire thing. So for a beta reader, say for your personal development book, they can go through the steps. Did they make sense? Did they work? Did they understand them? Was there information that they were missing at the front in order to really implement what you wanted to do? Then you know you need to put that in there. Were they lost in any places? So memoir, did they get your message? Did they get tangled up in a particular story up here that really cut them off track? Did they pick up a totally different idea than what you expected? Did they feel like it was satisfying? There's lots of things beta readers can tell you. And then for fiction books, obviously, did the plot work? Did they like the characters? Was the inner and outer journey captured? All these different types of things. So beta readers, as a tip, are a great, great resource to help you in your storytelling to make sure you got those little aspects done. Okay, social media. Think about social media as being condensed. Small posts. So my tip there, small posts, as you can tell. Attention span is very short on social media. You want to make sure that you keep your posts short and succinct. So take a look at it after you write out whatever you want to write. Take a look at the story that you included, how you began and ended. Remember, we talked about that. Are there any repeat concepts? If there are, get rid of the one that's less powerful. Is there extraneous stuff in there that isn't needed? Get rid of it. Is there something that you want to emphasize? So like maybe, and after I hit rock bottom, that's when I went to the priest or whatever it is, right? Whatever it is. Don't shove that on the end of a paragraph. Put that as a standalone because people are going to be like, oh, wow. What are the things you want to emphasize? How can you tighten it as much as you can? Because you need to capture somebody as they're scrolling by. And you know, it's so easy for people to scroll past, and we want to build that know, like, and trust factor that we talked about, which means they have to actually read your posts. So you want them to read it. I've had a lot of people ask me about the clickbait titles. Now, remember, if you are going to put something on there that's like, and then when he saw the picture, it was amazing what he did, whatever it is. You see those little titles. You want to have a payout. Make sure that you really have the payout. Don't just put it up there and it doesn't relate to what you're going to talk about. Make sure you have the payout. And break up your social media posts. So don't put it all in one, because it's so dense, people won't read it. Same thing with emails at work. When you see them all like mushed together. The other thing with social media posts is consider your audience. So really make sure that the stories that you're putting in there, because you have to be concise and shorter, are stories that are going to resonate with the audience you're trying to reach. You really want to make sure that you are connecting. So I could tell a story, the same story, to 3 different groups of people. And one of them might be like, oh my God, that's so funny. Oh, I totally go through that. And the other 2 are like, that has absolutely nothing to do with me. They're not going to get it. There are some stories that are universal, but there are many stories that you really want to connect with whoever your audience is and your niche is. So for many of us, we hear that as coaches, know your niche, know who you're going to be talking to. So if you're a mompreneur, then you're probably going to have mom stories. And those things that people can laugh about, oh yeah, that are moms. Some of you might have female entrepreneurs that are also juggling a corporate job. A lot of those stories that you might be telling to them are going to resonate with their thing that wouldn't necessarily resonate with somebody who was at home just with one job. So think about your audience, because you don't have much time in social media. So you really need to condense things down so that you can give them a nice little snapshot story and start them to get to go, oh, I like this person. I like what they're talking about. I don't know if I want to buy their stuff yet. I don't know if I want to work with them yet, but I like them. I like them. Okay. Now on to the toolkit. So the story toolkit you can use for various things. It's not a physical toolkit if you don't want it to be. It could be something that you have on your laptop or notebook, however you want to do it. But it gives you a way to start putting together stories so that they're ready to go. For fiction, memoir, book writers in general, you can put down future stories you want to explore. And it doesn't even have to be a full thought out story. It could be you saw something and you went, oh, that would make a really good subject for a story. Or for personal development, it could be, I've already taught them about how to overcome trauma. Now I want to talk about weight loss. Oh, I can really help them on this. You write some of those things down. For fiction writers, it could be just some of the basic plot points to something. Might be interesting. Now, for those who are doing social media, it's really important when they need stories to have stories to tell, right? So we all have stories to tell, but sometimes it's hard to think about them on the spot. You might be wanting to illustrate a particular point. You're like, I'm not sure about what story I've got. I don't know. Well, if you have a toolkit ready to go of different types of stories, and you can kind of look through them, and it might, even if you don't like those in there, it might spark you to go, oh, yeah, I remember the time. So how do you come up with these things? Well, one of the things that I do with my clients is give them different prompts to think about so that they can start generating these stories. And they don't have to flesh them out, but putting some of the bullet points down so you remember what that story was. So I'll give you just a quick example. Say, think about the last time that you laughed so hard that you start crying. Who were you with? How old were you? Do you remember what you were laughing about? How did you feel about those people when you saw them later after that experience? Did you feel closer to them? Did somebody become your best friend? There's lots of different things that can come out of that type of a moment. There might have been other things that happened during that time that you remember them when you remember that. And I have a funny moment that happened several years back with my sister, where we were just laughing our brains out and crying. We were doing Facebook, those little Facebook quizzes that come up with stupid stuff. And it was hilarious. I was just, tears were streaming down my face and stuff. And I remember in that moment, I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I have a sister who's also a friend. It was just amazing. It was just amazing. And I remember that fondly. And for me, that illustrates how even just the simplest little things that you do with the people that you love can just make incredible memories and bring you even closer. So just taking that as an example, but start thinking about different stories and start jotting them down. And you can even categorize them too, if you wanted, if that helps. And just have them down so that when you go, oh my gosh, I want to talk about this on social media to have people get to know me. Ooh, what do I want to pick from here? Because I find that it takes some of the overwhelm out of it for my clients when they know that they can pull from stories that are already there. They can at least have like a starting point so that they're not all of a sudden staring at the blank screen and going, I don't know what I should put down. So it's really helpful. So think about creating your own toolkit. So I hope that helps. So we went over some tips and tricks for books and social media, some basic storytelling stuff like grammar and punctuation. Remember those exclamation points. And then we talked about the toolkit. So I hope this gives you some really good ideas and also gets you inspired to start thinking about your stories and start getting them down, because the important thing is to start writing. And remember, writing is a muscle. So you're going to get better and better and better as you go. The writer I am today is not the writer I was when I started. And you have to make sure you give yourself some grace as you're learning, because you will get there. Okay, I believe in you. You can do this. So until next time, I hope that you are enjoying the storytelling journey and coming up with many more stories of your own. See you soon.